Welcome everyone to the first Bernstein event of the year. My name's Jay. I'm responsible for QA hires across all of Bernstein's London customers. If anyone hasn't come across us yet, we are a tech recruitment business. We help tech-driven companies hire great engineers across both London and the Northwest. Tonight's topic has really been inspired by some of the challenges I've personally faced in hiring great quality engineers for some of our customers. Many companies have their own views around these challenges, and I'm hoping that we can explore some of those tonight. We've brought together a great panel from different tech backgrounds for you. So we're hoping to see a diverse range of views tonight on today's topic. And I would encourage everyone to participate. We have developers, QAs, engineering managers, delivery managers, product from a range of different companies. So debate, share experiences, and hopefully make this a great conversation. So once again, welcome. I will now hand you over to Nicola Martin, Head of QA at Adarga, and our host for the evening. Over to you, Nicola.
It's working. Hi, everyone. Hi, my name's Nicola Martin. I'd like to introduce you all to welcome you all, first of all, to our event for this evening, which is influencing quality engineering and tackling the problems that come along with it. We've got a great panel here this evening. I'd like to, first of all, introduce myself, and then I'll introduce the panel and ask them all to give a quick intro and talk about themselves. So my name's Nicola Martin. I'm Head of Quality at Adarga. I've been in software testing, I've been a business analyst, and I've worked in projects in IT for about 20 years. So it gives me quite a unique view across quality and all of the types of issues that come up within that space. And it also means that I get to work with different disciplines across that space as well. So I'm really pleased to be with the panel tonight. To introduce everybody, we have Marc Abraham, who's Head of Product at Asos. We also have Marie Drake, who is Principal Test Automation Engineer at News UK. We have Antonello Caboni, who is Engineering Coach at Treatwell. And we also have Pedro Villela, and I'm sorry if I'm messing everybody's names up, but he's the Engineering Manager at Curve. So I'll start off by asking, sorry, could you, Marie, could you introduce yourself first of all? I'll switch off my camera for you to do that. Thanks.
Thanks, Nicola. Yeah. Hey, everyone. My name's Marie Drake. So like what Nicola said, I'm currently working as a principal test automation engineer at News UK. So I've, been in the software testing industry just for over 7 years, but mainly I've been really involved with the community, writing a lot of articles and also like producing contents to help other testers and developers out there. So if you have some time, you can check out my blog at mariedrake.com. I also have some courses that might benefit other people as well, whether you're into accessibility or if you're planning to learn more about other testing tools such as Cypress. So there's upcoming courses about that. And yep, I'm just really excited to share my insights on how the different people from the different areas on the tech like business view quality. So it's really great to be part of this panel.
Excellent. My name is Marc Abraham. As Nicola said, I'm a head of product at Asos. We've got a number of product areas at Asos. I focus on customer engagement, so things like CRM, end-to-end customer experience. I've been in product management for about 8 or 9 years. Now it's something I'm very passionate about, and I've also written about product management. So one of my books is called My Product Management Toolkit, where I do talk about testing, and equally I've talked about quality, specifically in my latest book, which is called Managing Product Equals Managing Intention.
Great.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm Antonello Caboni. As Nicola mentioned, I'm an engineering coach at Treatwell, and I've been in the industry for over 15 years. I've wore different hats, and I really enjoy working across as many domains as possible in the software engineering world, going from agile coaching to DevOps, from testing and test automation strategy to hands-on implementation. And specifically when it comes to quality, with a major shift in industry towards continuous delivery, the emphasis of my work in recent years has been around assisting tech teams in the design and adoption of approaches to engineering that can accelerate the journey towards continuous delivery. Very excited to be here today and hearing from my fellow panelists and answering the questions that you guys might have on the other side of this panel.
Hello, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm Pedro Villela. I'm currently engineering manager at Curve. I have been working with product development for about 14 years now. Also played many roles like software engineer, Scrum Master, even for a period of time as a proxy owner, let's say. Currently, I think my main concern is really how to create great teams with great culture. And I believe like quality is a big part of culture within a team. So yeah, I'm also excited to be here, and yeah, looking forward to discuss this important topic with this great panel.
Brilliant, thank you everyone. Just a quick reminder before we jump into the first discussion point for the audience. I just want to remind you that you can use the Zoom Q&A that Jay mentioned earlier, and also we'll be contributing some input via Slido as well. So Becca's going to share a Slido link in the chat down below, so please do feel free to go and use that link during the conversation. But with that, I'll kick off the first part of the discussion. The first topic that we have, everybody, is what should the role of the QA look like today? Do we need QA engineers any longer, or a QA consultant to advise developers how to test, automated or otherwise? What are your thoughts? Marie, if you could kick off with an answer on that one for me, please.
Yep. So I can definitely see, a trend, especially from, like attending other meetups and, just reading about what other testers from the community are saying. And it seems that some of them are, asking questions, is automation going to replace us? Do we need to 100% automate everything? Like I always see these questions from time to time. And my personal opinion is, we're always here to stay. However, we need to adapt. Um, rather than acting, like gatekeepers, I think the role of QA is moving towards, being like quality advocates. It's all about like sharing the knowledge, being like a quality coach, to your team, and not just owning the testing. So currently in one of like the projects that like I'm working at News, we are only two QA engineers, and we are basically split into different teams. And imagine there's like more than 20 developers. And if you just like do like a simple math, like, 20 developers, two QAs, and then if those only two QAs are doing all the testing, then we're not going to have time to like finish everything. So I firmly believe that we're moving towards the role where instead of us just doing all the tests, especially just the functional tests, we're moving towards the role where we're actually helping developers to write tests. And this is backed up by like emerging tools nowadays that are more developer friendly, that caters to improving their developer experience, so they can be like motivated to write the tests. And I think this doesn't necessarily mean that we're not needed. I think we are definitely needed, but where we provide value is going to be on a much broader area. So rather than just like, let's say, owning or just like doing the the checks or like the functional tests, we're thinking of like how can we improve like the speed of our release process, like how can we improve, like the usability, like the user experience. So there's a lot of other areas, where we can provide, value. And I think this is where like we need like the other, help from the developers as well. So I think, yeah, we're moving into like a coaching role, and championing that everyone should be testing, and it's not just our responsibility anymore.
Okay. Does anybody else want to try and answer that?
Yeah, I'm happy. Oh, sorry.
Go first, Marc.
See, I love virtual panels, basically, all the enthusiasm. No, I think Marie was spot on. The only thing that I think would be a shame to miss out on, and that's why I also, a bit like Marie was saying, when people talk about automation and let's get rid of testers and stuff, is what I see is the tester's mindset. So as a product person, I've really got good relationships with, and I want to have good relationships with quality engineers or testers, whatever the title is, because they really have that fantastic blend of understanding the problem or the system, but also understanding customer behaviors. And again, that's, whatever shape that will take, but I think there will always be need for that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the only thing I would like to add on top of what Marie was saying, I think I agree with her to a great extent. I do believe, though, that even if you move away from being kind of a QA engineer within a team and move to be more like a consultant or enabler, it's still good to have someone that's been in the trenches, that actually not only like they actually did the work and they know the pain, and when they enable, they have those things in mind. But definitely moving more to a consultant role also as a way to avoid kind of handoffs sort of thing, and increase the feedback loop.
Who do you think should be responsible for the management, if you like, the governance of testing, if we're passing this responsibility now away more from QA, but to spread it out amongst the whole engineering function? Who should be, still governing that? If we're only consultants, is that something that you think that we should still govern as QA?
Yes, I think that there still needs to be some area that has the core knowledge and identifies what's actually required for the company. So let's say your OKRs would be how many engineers you can, enable to be better at doing tests. I'm just guessing something here, okay? I believe that still there is the core knowledge that should stay within a particular area.
If I can add something to that, one pitfall to keep in mind is that by wanting to empower teams to take more ownership around the quality of the product and the software that they develop, they also need to take on some of that, let's call it governance themselves. Because if they are not in charge of deciding when they want to release the increments that they developed, then they're just gonna give up on their desire to be the owners and the drivers of that. And so I think actually the role of the QA as a coach, of a test professional working alongside with those teams, can help building those processes and practices and checklists or pipelines that can help translate that governance into something that they own and that they can have control of, with the support of QA from the organization, whether it's the engineers, that QA engineers or test engineers that work on a day-to-day basis with them, or perhaps some more ad hoc interventions. And so going back to what Pedro was mentioning earlier about his love for culture, I think this is also part of creating that culture that can make it sustainable.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So if I could just ask some offshoot questions around that subject. So I've obviously just asked that one before. If we are to hand off, I guess, the governance and to make people accountable for their work within the quality sphere, what do you think maybe if we can have our product owner, Marc, answer that, this one. What do you think quality means to you as a product owner?
Well, my hope is that as a product manager, it means exactly the same thing as ultimately everyone else in the team, where you deliver the value to the customer that you set. Sorry, I was muted for some reason.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was just saying, you deliver the value that to the customer you set out to deliver, and ideally as a team, right? And that you can break that down more granularly. I think the key thing, and Pedro rightly touched on that culture a bit, because I don't even want to talk in terms of handoff. Call me a hippie, Nicola, but I believe that, quality should be everyone's responsibility, right? And what that means practically, so what I'm trying to do with my teams in my current role, but also in previous roles, is really, for instance, I do things like pairing, where I really encourage a product owner to sit with a QA or a developer to sit with a QA. So again, we all have that shared understanding of the value that we're trying to deliver to the customer and how that breaks down.
Mm-hmm. So that's interesting that you've just said about a product owner sitting with a QA to do that testing. So they're doing pair testing too?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And working together, maybe less so in Asos because it's bigger, but particularly in smaller companies, it's so much easier to say, let me pick on Marie, right? Product manager sits with Marie, they work through an acceptance test and the edge cases together, and you have that shared understanding. And equally, I would have a developer sit with Marie to understand, okay, what do I need to look out for? And equally then for Marie as a quality engineer to understand a bit more what's behind the code. So again, that whole idea of making much more of a shared responsibility, like I said.
Yeah, that's definitely like the definition basically of quality belonging to everybody in the group. Good example. Okay, what do you think are the main factors that influence how high quality sits in the priority list? I don't know if Pedro or Maria, you want to try and answer this, Maria?
I think, yeah, so one of like for me, like our role as QA, like we can't really dictate in terms of like what needs to be like prioritized. I think that's one of like misconception that just because you're a quality engineer, then you have like the final say. So what you can do instead is to communicate what are the risks, like if we don't like implement it, or if we don't think of all the different like edge cases scenarios, that we need to make sure that we communicate it as earlier on as possible. And I think this is why like sessions, so I don't know, like depending on like the team that you have, but for example from our case, we do like tech analysis sessions, we have like the different requirements gathering session where QAs are also involved, and we talk about like the different risks. And what I love about this meeting is it's not just only the QA engineers who's thinking about like what the different risk factor are that impacts, like for example, if there is a feature that needs to be like really important that they need to release to the users, like I like that even our developers are also contributing. So it goes to show that we are like making like small steps to ensure that everyone is thinking about quality, and they're not just asking myself all these like questions.
Yeah, because I think I remember from a previous meeting you said that your team are not responsible for prioritization of work and things like that. Yeah. So, but as long as you're able to input, because when I was a tester a long while ago, really, the responsibility was on us to set that prioritization and to drive, what would be fixed, So, that's totally changed, and it's a mindset change for us as QAs to sit back and, just advise, and then it's up to the product teams and, like everybody that gets together to review tickets as to what the prioritization of work should be. Yeah. I agree. Okay, that brings us nicely onto our next subject. But before I go into that, I'd just like to remind everybody again that there is a link in the chat. You should see that bottom of the screen, I think. It's a Slido link. So please go ahead and input to input there on Slido, as we'll be going back to that cloud later and asking some of the questions from there, based on what's the most important subject that comes up in that Slido link. So therefore, let's go on to the next subject. Okay, what are the best ways to get the wider business thinking more about quality? So this is really expanding on from the previous question where we were saying that quality is the responsibility of everybody. How do we get the business to start thinking about quality? What approaches have you used to try and get the buy-in from the different teams? And what challenges did you face? Antonello, you're up first.
Sure. So I think one of the fundamental points for me, and based on my experience of working with organizations that have brought me in with the challenge of helping them figure out how to do quality better, is to find allies. So with that, I mean, find people who share your vision and who are keen to see things improve in certain areas. And there might be more than you think, especially in tech these days. And but amongst these allies, it's particularly important that you also find people who are recognized leaders in the organization, and invest in educating them, which often means, you know, keeping talking about why quality matters, what's in it for them, listen to their needs, and try and translate why you think quality deserves that importance, also based on what it is that they're trying to achieve. And so in a way, trying to get them on board with understanding how it's going to make a difference to their own success and the success of the organization. And in my experience, in time, if you persist and you work closely with them, you see the world changing, and especially they see the world changing, and they start seeing it through your own lenses. And they will also be the ones who start championing the very same things that you were championing in the first place. And so some of these leaders then would also have that network of stakeholders. And so if they start even to, you know, bring forward some of the messages that you started to champion, then like this is how love spreads. And it can be a bit tiring at times, maybe a lonely place, especially when you start, but it pays off. And you asked for an example, and I've got like a playful one that wasn't necessarily the most fundamental game changer, but actually it is from Asos, Marc, but that was like back in 2012, 2013. I was the principal QA engineer there, and I was offered a slot on one of the tech all hands. And so I wanted to help the wider team understand a bit more about quality and about the investment that we were putting in it. And, you know, I could have given a presentation with slides and the usual why, what we're doing, etc. But I decided to run a quiz instead. And that was like probably to like 200, 300 people. I can't remember exactly how many people there were in tech at that time. So I put together a few questions addressing some of the assumptions and myths that often there are around quality, and specifically that we had at Asos back then. It was fun and insightful at the same time. And it really helped with the message kind of penetrating and sticking and so there was a relatively large audience, and it got people talking, and I think people remember some of those kind of funny questions from the quiz that were a reflection of reality, though. They were not just for fun, they were just real answers to real questions.
One thing I can say though as well is for in the wider business, people are quite obsessed with velocity, right? These days, and sustained velocity can only be achieved with quality. So this is another way to kind of sell a little bit more to the wider business why you should be hiring more SCTs or QA engineers, whatever you call them.
Yeah, and if I can quickly add to that is, I always, and maybe you expect that from a product person, try to also bring it back to the customer. So I try to do, you know, make sure that my product owners or managers do regular kind of product retrospectives as a really nice vehicle, a bit like you do team retrospectives, but really zooming in on the product and taking all the customer learnings about what doesn't work, you know, issues they've had, bugs that they've had, because it's very easy, a bit going on to what Pedro was saying, you've got that velocity where we're churning stuff out, and, you know, we've done some testing, but then we we're on to the next thing. So to really bring it back and doing that through the customer. So it's not me, the product owner, trying to get it back on the radar, or the QA for that matter. It's the customer.
I think just to add as well, it really helps if you speak the language that that the business can understand.
Yeah.
So one of the book that I've read last year, and I recommend this to everyone, is called Leading Quality. So it's by Ronald Cummings John.
I knew you were going to say that, actually. I
So
knew you would.
it's so amazing, and like you can like read it for like 2 or 3 hours, like if you want like to finish it. But basically, he mentioned that if like finding allies is really important, but if you can't connect to that person directly, find someone who's like closer, to that person, and then you can influence that person first, and then that person will then influence that person that you're trying to aim. So if I can give like a concrete example, so I was tasked to look into a specific tool, and I think in terms of like business, they're like, why do we need third party tools? They're expensive. We can just use like the open source. But sometimes you just have to consider what your requirements are, and if the third party tools are much better, then provide those data, like provide like what's the impact if you don't get this tool, or like what's the current like situation. So make sure that you visualize all this data into something that that the business can understand, so they can have better idea as to why you want to improve like the quality.
And if I can add, just given Marie, that you mentioned the book, there's also, I think, another strong, let's say, supporting message around not just quality, but I think a lot of the practices that often come with a more modern approach to quality. And in the book Accelerate, which again I would probably recommend to everybody who works in tech, that comes from the work that Jez Humbles and people that Jez Humble works with, getting lots of data from what they call the State of DevOps report for many years, but effectively they actually looked at how both the performance and the culture of organization is influenced by following certain practices, of which a modern approach to quality and quality engineer is one of them. And so there's also now the backup of data that shows how companies that do well at quality, together with other things, are actually the companies that also perform better in the market.
Yeah, they're both very good books, and especially the first one, Leading Quality. I actually went to a breakfast last year, early last year, around it was like the book launch, and mind blown. I was handing out copies of the book to people and saying, you must read this, even if you're not in QA, you must read it. So yeah, I totally recommend that one as well. Just as some offshoot questions to that main question, what are the differences when approaching a quality mindset within a small company or a startup versus established larger companies? And I don't know who wants to try and answer that one.
I can start this one because it's part of what I wanted to mention before. One thing that I find tricky is in new companies where you don't have internal data to back up that you should be having more quality measures within your product development process. Sometimes it's hard to use external data, such as what Antonello was saying, to say, oh, this is what happens. Sometimes I think people need to see it for themselves and like flat face on the ground when things go wrong, to then you start to say, okay, this was the data. Because we did not invest in this particular processes, now we are in this situation. And I think this is very common in very young startups. Whereas with the more the bigger companies, I think they already have quite a lot of data about how things can go really wrong if not invested in quality. Would like to hear from others.
Do you think that issue with larger companies is kind of resolved by the fact that they farm out a lot of the quality type work to consultancies or to contractors, so they don't really need to set that themselves? Other companies do that work for them, as opposed to a smaller company where everybody really is responsible for quality, and there's more focus on them.
I'm not sure about larger companies having sorted out these things. To be honest, like there will be like different cultural values that will also block the quality mindset, which is, for example, the mindset of handoffs is quite common in larger companies. But this is one of the ways I think they differ from smaller companies to larger companies. I don't know, like I don't think it's fixed or sorted out in larger companies in any way. It's a different type of problem only.
No, I think.
Yeah, go Marc.
I think the only thing I'd add to that is whether you farm it out or not. I think you still have, particularly with larger companies, is you've got more systems, you've got more dependency. So I think it puts more pressure on, consistency of process, consistency of standards, governance, like you mentioned, Nicola. So that's the only thing I'd add to that.
Yeah, one of the obvious advantages of a startup versus a larger company is that if you want to try and create that culture from the start, it's obviously a more approachable challenge. You've got just a fewer number of people to get on board. Whilst if you're trying to do the same thing in an organization that has dozens or hundreds of people, it's a more of an uphill journey. But at the same time, I think also Carolina mentions it in the chat here, the fact that startups are really driven by fast growth. And so whilst on the one hand, it might be easier perhaps to get everybody on board, on the other hand, there's a real desire to churn feature fast. And so how do you get to balance the quality, which is not just making sure that what you release doesn't have any bugs, it's also what you create around it so that the quality is supported for the remaining of the lifetime of the product. And I think there's always some kind of positive tension and trying to find what the right balance is between ensuring the success of the startup, but at the same time, setting up yourself for success as well from an engineering and quality point of view.
Cool. Okay, thanks for those answers, everybody. Right, it's actually bang on time at the moment, so I'll move us into our third topic. How do you identify a quality mindset or skills when hiring? What kind of indicators do you look out for in a potential hire to show that they have that quality mindset? Pedro, if you could answer first, please.
I think one of the main things is to be to consciously add things around quality on your interview process. So for example, you interview a software engineer and don't wait for them to mention anything about testability of their systems or their code if you're having some sort of tech interview. Explicitly ask about, oh, this is your design. How can your design fail? How can your code fail? How do you know that your design is gonna fail or your code is gonna fail? And this needs to making this explicitly, I think makes sure that you identify engineers that are used to think with a quality mindset. So for example, they will approach the problem from, okay, I know that because the way I thought my design, I thought that it would fail here, and it would kind of list some of the criteria that they thought their design would be solving, the problem the design would be solving, and some of the criteria that they would measure against, right? So this is one thing. I remember I was talking to someone very recently. So in an interview process where they asked the engineer they had a document of requirements and say, now with this document of requirements, split down tasks for, let's say you're a tech lead, split down tasks for our engineers to work on. And they would evaluate how much of kind of acceptance criteria kind of thing this engineer would write while writing the tasks. So I think this is also part of quality, right? Thinking about what is your success case, what are the corner case, everything around that is a hint that the engineer has a quality mindset.
Marc, I'm actually quite keen to find out your thoughts on it from a product perspective. When you're hiring, for example, are you thinking about somebody having a quality mindset?
Yes, absolutely. And I can tell you exactly the kind of things I don't want to hear if you're interviewing for a product role, because you'll be amazed. I don't know if you have had similar experiences or people on the call, how many people say, no, quality, that's the QA's job, or no, I've never written a single acceptance criterion in my life. I was like, okay. No, but we're laughing now, but it's, Nida is asking me the question in chat. I had a quick look. I expect someone who's thought about quality can articulate that for me, because even in this conversation, you can see it means different things to different people, but also can talk to how he or she would ensure that quality is maintained. So again, you get a plus from me if you can bring examples to the table where you do work closely with a QA, like I said at the beginning, in terms of working through acceptance criteria and edge cases, for instance. So yeah, it's definitely something that I look out for. And I also sometimes ask, like, give me an example of a product that you've seen or worked on where quality clearly hasn't been maintained or built in.
Yeah, cool. Okay, Marie, I'm keen also to hear your thoughts from a QA perspective.
Yeah, so we've actually been like interviewing, for a QA engineer role, and one of the key things that I'm looking for is I'm always like cautious just not to make it around technical. So I also want to understand, what's the person's view on, like critical thinking, like what's its communication like, like their creativity, because being able to write tests, to use a programming language, yep, that's a really handy skill that can enhance your testing skill. But at the same time, we shouldn't forget that that's just one side of testing. The other side is really doing exploratory testing, testing for user experience or accessibility. So if a candidate can sort of like show that he or she has some technical skills, which would be really handy, but at the same time he or she also knows the importance of like participating on like the risks, like analysis session, and like asking the right questions, being curious as to how the system works, then those are really great attributes. Yeah.
And finally, Antonello.
Yeah, I think just to touch on what Marie said, I think what Marie has mentioned around, doing effectively some scenario-based interviewing and taking a requirement, a user story, and just seeing how the candidate reacts to having to think critically, find gaps, ask questions, I think can help a lot with assessing whether whether it's an engineer, QA, a product person, are actually committed to working on quality. And I think you can see through how they would approach some of those challenges. Yeah. And then I think for engineers, the other thing is you can also, and I think for QAs, you can actually talk about testing more in detail. And some of those challenges, you actually think how you'd approach testing then. Perhaps, you might ask QA, you would expect from a QA a different answer that you'd expect from an engineer. But I think also kind of testing how they would approach their testing challenges in a concrete scenario can really help understand whether that mindset is there or not.
No, good answers. So we do have some extra questions here. So to take that a step further, if you've already got a team and you want them to do quality better, how do you identify any gaps in your internal knowledge? And how do you do like the need for improvement? How do you approach that with your teams? Don't know who wants to take that one first.
Just the basic, for example, number of times you got interrupted as an engineer because of a bug in production. If you have many of those, like, oh, I couldn't do my task today because I was looking into this bug that happened, this incident. This is a indication that you have gaps there and you need to address those.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in, if that's okay. One thing, maybe more of a productive thing to do is I find it useful, doing a kind of product audit or experience mapping, where, bit to Pedro's point, where you see where do we get the most complaints, for instance. You can just look at the numbers, or where do we end up fixing the most bugs on a regular basis, again, from different parts of the journey. So that's another way of visualizing, and also just making that more of a team exercise to go through.
Okay, I do have one more question for this section. What practices have you employed to help support change and bring everyone on the journey?
I can give one example, and it's specific in the context of quality. In our case, was to at Treatwell to step up our approach to test automation, especially in the context of continuous delivery. So we've had an objective in tech for a couple of years, which is to deliver smaller, more frequent releases of independently deployable applications. And so one of the challenges that we had with that was to have an approach to quality, and in particular to the quality that we could add to our build and deployment pipelines that would make it possible. So what we did, we surveyed the entire tech team and said, right now, this is going to be our baseline. What's your confidence in our approach? And we got a number, which I think was around 7. Then we spent the next 6 months doing lots of workshops involving people from different teams to try and understand both where we were at, where the gaps were, and try and articulate a vision and approach that would work for everybody, for teams that might be working more on the front end or the back end. And so they helped us articulate some principles that are still valid today, but also some more concrete approaches to how to implement it. Then we surveyed again, and we saw that in those 6 months, that confidence score that we'd asked our teams had gone up. And I think, the output of the confidence score going up was a nice thing to see, but the most important, valuable thing was that by involving engineers and the people who actually work in the team in those conversations, that knowledge grew just from being part of the conversations. And going back to the allies idea, they also became allies because they felt involved, they felt that they're part of that journey, and they wanted to go ahead and work with their teams to make it possible.
I think for me personally, just by speaking about testing and quality a lot, it really helps. So like last year, I did this. It's like a flash talk. We do this thing at work where different people like share their insights, and I talk about accessibility testing, and I know it's something that all of us are thinking that we should be doing it, but you'll be surprised that not a lot of companies are still doing
Yeah,
it.
I'm not surprised at all.
Just by speaking more about it and educating the rest of the business really helps, because after I've done that talk, like just like after 2 or 3 weeks, we got some input from our UX designer, and she did another talk around accessibility. So it's just it's like a spiral effect. So you just talk about it, you influence, and then other people will like also do the same. Yeah.
Okay.
I just have one more thing.
Okay, no, go ahead. One more thing, go ahead.
Just as, again, from an engineering manager perspective, one thing that is very important for us to do with our engineers is like you have a one-to-one, and people are talking about, your engineers talking about some thing that they need to deliver quickly because there is a deadline, and they say, oh, we're gonna accrue a lot of technical debt. You need to discuss with them that we evaluate engineers as well by doing good quality solutions, code, architecture. So they feel incentivized also that there is something around their career that is around code quality or quality in general, right? Not only delivery and hacking things together and pushing things to production, regardless of everything else, right? I think it's quite an important part of giving confidence to engineers that they can say no, and they can say no because it's not we don't have time to do that with enough quality or good enough quality. according to our standards right now. I think it's
okay. Right. Thank you very much, everybody, for all of your answers on that last topic. We are going to hand over to Becca now. Becca, are you going to present the Slido word cloud?
There you go. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Amazing. So these, thank you all for contributing to our Slido. These are obviously some of the suggestions and the challenges that our audience are facing. So are there any that you guys on the panel can kind of see and maybe want to pick out straight away? Maybe any that resonate particularly with you?
Sorry, I just saw the first one, the inverted testing pyramid, the heavy end-to-end tests. So this, I think this is still a very, common problem. So it's great to see that, yeah, like everyone, I mean, most people are still like facing these challenges. And this is one of the thing why I'm advocating for, developers to help write the tests, because, if they can write, on the unit level, on the component level, then we wouldn't need to have a lot of like end-to-end tests, because like we all know that end-to-end tests are quite time consuming, they're very expensive to run, and they're really flaky. So the more we can push this down and the more help we get from our developers, then I think, yeah, we can solve this challenge bit by bit.
And on that specifically, then my recommendation, in addition to what Mari has said, is exploit your system boundaries. These days, it's rare to work on like in estates and platforms where there is just one application, and so the only way to test it is through some kind of end-to-end test. Normally, there are various services involved. They all communicate through some kind of protocols, and so use that to break up your testing so that you don't end up with those large tests that have to cover a huge amount of system that are unreliable. And as Marie said, the developers sometimes can be not necessarily more qualified. At times they could be more qualified, but I think they can bring a real set of skills in addition to that would complement the ones of a test professional to agree together what the best approaches would be.
One that struck me, if I'm looking, it says, what is it? Measure the value. That's the one that really jumped out at me because it links a few of the other things that are mentioned in this word cloud. Is I think we all have a role to play in really explaining the value of quality, linking it to business goals. Because again, to the point that was made earlier, is how do you do that in a language that everyone gets? But I found the most effective when it comes to measuring value is really quantifying the risks of not testing for quality, right? Or the risks of, not doing that properly and affecting speed to market or cost of delay. Again, that's a language, and there's numbers around that, metrics around that everyone across the business or organization will get.
I wonder whether we are avoiding a bit. I think your answer partly starts touching on that, Marc, but the elephant in the room, which is the big blue ballast in delivering pressures. And there are lots of other ones like, I think, speed and I think a few other ones that I noticed that are more or less around the same theme.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always think it's such a classic one. And can we link it also to the one where it says finding time to focus on quality, which again, maybe it's nirvana for some of us on the call, but it should be an integral part of what we do. And it's not something that we necessarily need to carve out time for. But I think as a team, but definitely as a product person, we should always look at the iron triangle between time, scope, and budget. And I expect the product owner to always, fight the flag for scope and for quality, if that makes sense, because that's something that he or she can really influence. Yeah, and I don't know about you guys, and maybe I'm going to say something controversial, but I find these kind of delivery pressures and stuff, sometimes I find there's a bit of a false economy there, because we're trying to meet a deadline. Sometimes never happens. Very rarely it's an imaginary deadline, but someone set a deadline that we're now sticking to. But what you then find is we're starting to cut corners from a quality perspective or customer experience perspective that come and bite us not even that much later on. And again, that's why it's a false economy. So I would always be very careful. One thing I say to my product managers, for instance, is when there's these delivery pressures, really think about the iron triangle and also think about why is that pressure there? How can we mitigate it without, sacrificing quality and the customer value?
Yeah, I think you touched on a very important topic, which is why is there a deadline and a delivery pressure in the first place, right? If I think even before tackling quality, like and having the time for quality, you need to tackle that particular bit first. Why do you come up with some arbitrary deadlines? I think usually it's because you want to run faster than other companies, because you think that everything is a missed opportunity if you don't deliver on a particular date. This is more often than not in my own experience, although I yield that sometimes you do have a very tight deadline for a good reason. And in these cases, I would say, like, coming up with a solution that is not optimal, but agreeing that you're gonna come back to that immediately later to fix whatever it is, that so you don't leave too long, and then, like, because technical debt and things that can go out of control, you don't want that. These will hurt the velocity later on.
Yeah, I think as Antonello said, that but balancing delivery pressures is such a sizable elephant, because even with the approach, and I totally agree, Pedro, if you're saying, well, we'll come back to it, if you're not careful, there's another delivery pressure. And before you know, you've got kind of a really bad customer experience. You're not meeting business objectives. You've got technical debt coming out of your ears. So one of the things like I said before, is, okay, if the deadline, imaginary or not, doesn't budge, speed to market doesn't give, we have to do that, to your point, Pedro, then I would always look at, all right, let's look at scope. Do it, a small increment or small iteration, but at least make sure that it checks all the kind of expectations that we have from a quality perspective.
Yeah, I'm talking more about regulatory things, for example, where you cannot cut scope, for example.
There's also another element, which is the, in time, understanding as an organization or as a team what's actually not negotiable. And unfortunately, we come from years of baggage when it comes to quality, because of how it was approached traditionally, and probably still these days, as sometimes an afterthought, sometimes as a second-class citizen, sometimes just as a stage after development. Whether that's in an agile world where that happens in small increments, or whether it's in a more in a less agile world, whether those increments are probably larger than something then it takes a couple of days to develop. But the fact that it always comes afterwards, I think, opens up to the possibility of making choices on quality because there are delivery pressures. But you wouldn't treat other parts of engineering the same way. I think very few businesses would go and start making code changes on a production environment just to fix a bug, right? But perhaps 10 years ago, that was a possibility. And so I think if in time, and it's not going to happen overnight, but you're going to start to set what's not negotiable when it comes to quality, I think people will stop questioning it, and it will just become part of those real or kind of wishful thinking estimates and deadlines that that people aspire to hit. So I hope that in time, most teams can get to a point where doing certain things around quality will just happen because there's no other way of doing it but then doing it that way.
What do you think, just curious, what's your view on development bias? I'm intrigued by that. Can you see it? It's just on the
I wonder what development bias means. But I think actually maybe if I were to interpret it as development is more important, writing code is more important than writing tests.
Right.
Do
Okay.
you see it that way? I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm just curious.
That's how I've understood it as well. Yeah, and which is why it's quite important to just like communicate again and again that writing test code or testing is it's part of the development process as well. Like it's not a separate stage anymore. We do testing on various stages, and I think maybe in some places the thinking is still quite a bit old fashioned, where develop development activities here, and then the developers will like throw it on the other side of the wall for like a different QA team to test the features on. And which is why we end up in situations where on like a 2 week like sprint cycle, for example, more days or more importance is put into the development, and then testing is always left like just at the end of the life cycle, which I think, yeah, there's definitely some improvements that need to be done. And yeah, I think just making sure that everyone is aware that testing is not just a phase anymore. It's embedded into the different like stages on a development life cycle. I think that's the first step.
Marie, I would absolutely agree with you that development bias is really real. And, I see it project after project in different companies. It's exactly the same. I contracted for 10 years. It was exactly the same. The fact that the quality is given that last minute, like you can have this work now, but you must get it tested by, say, tomorrow, and there's only 1 day left in the sprint. It means that nobody is really across product, across the development, they're not taking quality seriously, and they haven't got that mindset. So there was a little option there. I think I saw it in the a question in the cloud that about QA being responsible for testing and being responsible for quality. Being responsible for quality, again, is this whole thing of getting that quality mindset amongst everybody. That's working on a project or in engineering and beyond engineering as well, so that other teams outside of that understand if they're putting these unrealistic deadlines on us, or applying this extra pressure that's not required. Ultimately it has a bad effect on the quality of the products that we're putting out, and something has to give. So development bias is absolutely a real thing.
I was just waving at Marie's daughter, but hopefully she's come, because I think she can add to this conversation. I think another smaller, hello. What do you think of quality? No, but I was also going to add maybe, which is a smaller elephant, but definitely worth considering, is, how different people across across an organization can be incentivized. So I've worked with project managers who are literally incentivized, just get the project over the line. This is the deadline. If you do it within time, scope, and budget, you're good, right? I've got literally dev teams working like number of releases we can get out in a month, and that's our objective, and that's how we get incentivized. Luckily, I don't see that Asos, but that is also when you want to get that culture and that mindset in place, like you talked about, Nicola. You need to align those objectives and incentives too, I think.
And I'd like to add also that whilst I think development bias can definitely be a thing, and it's a natural, I can understand where it comes from. I can understand why people see it as the major value adding activity. Obviously, I don't agree with that, but I can see where that comes from. But I think there are lots of places out there, and perhaps I've been lucky enough to work in some of those places where the bias is not there. And I think it's a sign of victory, where the question around how much time is spent writing code versus doing other things goes away completely. And you are just doing the right thing at the right time. And sometimes it might be writing 2 lines of code and spending, I don't know, 3 days to sort out your tests or your telemetry and other activities that you know as a team that you need to do. And I think there are realities where that happens. So I would like to give hope to people who might think that they work in an environment where the development bias is very strong, that can change. And I've seen it change. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like that. So, yeah.
I think that comes with maturity though, right? If you're in say a startup, for example, that can be the case all the time. Or, you know, I've seen it in bigger companies and banks, and, you know, I've seen it in a lot of places, but I think it also comes with maturity of the processes, maturity of the teams working together, and just understanding that the quality is their, you know, whole responsibility. And so they do need to allow enough time for work to be, you know, assessed properly to make sure that it's fit for purpose and they can go to production, you know, and just to give people the confidence basically that what they're putting out is good enough for customers. But they need to give the time. Another thing I would like to add is, like, I don't have a lot of data to back this up, what I'm going to say, but it seems that like it's an anecdote, right? Depending on, like, I worked in a company where to make the right things, to write tests was easy. And we didn't have friction there. Like, it was just easy to write a test. So people would just go along and write the test and like embed in their development process. Now, if it's every time you want to do a small features, it's very difficult to build, like, write and run your tests, or it takes long, the feedback loop is not great. Then I think, you know, engineers will try to game the system and just get away with not writing the tests. I was culprit of this myself, and I believe this is the case for many other organizations. It's very, very hard to do the right thing. Right. As we saw, Becca removed the cloud from the page because we're actually should be in our next segment now. We've got some questions in the Q&A tab, and so I'd like to put these to the panel now, if I may. The first one is, I work in, sorry, it's an anonymous attendee as well, by the way. I work on big data and have struggled to manage / complete some huge QA tasks within a sprint, which was disliked by the Scrum Master. How can such difficult stakeholders be managed? I tried explaining the importance of the QA task and that it cannot be squeezed just for the sake of completing it in a sprint, but it did not work. Oh, I'm desperate to answer it, but I'll let one of you. Anybody want to take? I ask you to repeat the question again. I'm sorry. Okay. All right, and if you can't answer it, I might. But
it's also on the Q&A tab, Pedro.
It's in the Q&A tab. It says,
bring it up.
I work on big data and have struggled to manage or complete some huge QA tasks within a sprint, and that was disliked by the Scrum Master. How can such difficult stakeholders be managed? I tried explaining the importance of the QA task and that it cannot be squeezed just for the sake of completing it in a sprint, but it did not work.
I mean, it's a big question in a way, right? It's kind of difficult to address it in a couple of minutes, but in that, without knowing too much about the anonymous attendees environment, I can assume that the QA tasks, which how they are called in there, are treated as separate entities from the main work. And so I think probably having that setup in place where, you know, development is done and then there are some huge QA tasks, I imagine, then doing it in a mini waterfall fashion, I think makes it very hard to make it fit within, you know, the context of here it's talking about, I think, the time box of a sprint. And also it's gonna open the floor for questions around why is it not done yet? Why is it not done yet? So I think the question around is it done or not should probably be more aligned with the entire piece of work, or which some of these QA tasks are part of. But I wonder whether there's a misalignment there between somebody does the work, then it's get tested, and try and see whether the team can try and formulate a way of saying, this is what's often called our definition of done. This is for every piece of work that we do, it's not considered done until all these things have happened, or which doing those huge QA tasks would be part of.
Yeah, and if there's anything you can do to build on what Antonello just said is, and this applies to a lot of items as part of that product development process, is how can you do something early and often, right? And if that means you have to spread it over a number of sprints, then that's what you do, right? But, you know, I think that there is sometimes that risk of still creating these mini waterfall processes within a sprint, because we have to, you know, again, hit the sprint cutoff point.
Anybody else want to try and answer that one?
I think in a kind of a more simplified version of the definition of done is more like, are you okay with me serving your customer, like pushing code to production or whatever it is to production, but I don't know if it works, and it can have these other consequences here, because if it doesn't work, either I'm gonna, you know, if you're working in a fintech or something like that, means that you're gonna have wrong reports for your customers. They're gonna be like, oh, where's my money? Like, are you okay with the consequences of things going really, really wrong? It's kind of a simplified version of, this is the definition of done, and I'm not accomplishing all of these things.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have a couple of questions here, actually. Oh, they're coming through thick and fast. What aspects of quality do you want to focus on versus which do you sacrifice when you're a startup and experimenting or rapidly iterating to try and find PMF? That's from Beth.
Well, I think by now you should know and be able to predict what I'm going to say, in a sense that obviously in a startup, I'm going to be worried less about the kind of, you know, the scalability of my quality per se, because my key focus in a startup is really about, okay, can I deliver the right amount of quality to learn, you know, or to test the assumptions or to mitigate the risks that I've identified. So for me, that's always there going to be the trade-off. So you're less focused, as much as you'd like to be, in terms of the scalability of what you put out there and how much you can support it. It's much more about the customer experience, getting that right, and, you know, because you need to get some key learnings, assumptions right at that stage.
And then the other thing that I would add to that is also, and it's mentioned in the question, the rapid experimentation. I think another advantage you can have as a startup is to create practices that are going to allow you to release faster and get feedback faster. And so even in the circumstances in which you might not have the right, and I hate to call it like that, but quality processes in place upstream, you can still address some of the quality problems with your fast feedback loops. And so these are kind of like around the ideas of testing in production and shifting right. And I'm not advocating, you know, be irresponsible and just chuck everything live that you can. But if you have those mechanisms in place that are going to allow you to get the feedback straight away, even from production or from other environments, and react faster, that's often a really good strategy that you can leverage to when perhaps you don't have either the resources or the skills to be able to do quality better as you build it into the product.
I agree with Antonello, because, you know, if for example you just want to release something, you need to also make sure that, you know, at the same time you're not compromising, you know, quality. And, you know, he mentioned things like, you know, testing production, and, you know, you can do things like feature flags as well. So that could be an option that that a company can look into. And I think just having a stable, you know, pipeline in place where you can roll back easily the changes. So at least if there are issues, then, you know, you can just easily roll back to a previous version that's working. I think that's really important.
I think the feature flags thing, Marie, also applies to the previous question as well. So that actually it's that applies in the answer applies to that as well, in terms of if you had a big piece of work to go into a production environment, you could use feature flags. Our next question is, how do we speed releases without compromising quality?
Well, So I think part of the answer is linked to what we were just talking about. I think there are some what often called in the DevOps world as the technical practices of feedback. There are opportunities there to incorporate some of these practices. Feature flags is one of them, but there are others, and good telemetry to help you with that. But also looking at the processes that you follow when you have to release, and look at what are the in your flow, what are the things that are taking you a long time, and try and reduce the amount of time that it takes to do those things. Automate what you can automate, and it doesn't have to be run manually. Things that computers can do better than humans. And so once you start accelerating that in that sense, that opens up to the possibility of looking at other things that might help you with quality. So if a QA engineer, for example, is always busy repeating always and always the same test for things that actually don't need to be run by a human, then they might not have a lot of time to potentially look at other things, and your releases are going to suffer in terms of the let's say the cycle time.
But even that is very difficult to sell sometimes, right? Because to build the tooling that you need, to have that confidence that you can go from, from tickets to production with everything automated, you need to dedicate time. It doesn't happen like by itself, right? You need to invest time and consciously say, I want to do that because I want to have a gain in the future. And this is again another difficult thing to sell and to agree with stakeholders.
Okay, and our last question is from James Thomas. Have you ever agreed what quality means within a team in the same way that you might agree a definition of done? Can you share a definition you used and say how it helped and or how it didn't help?
I'm not sure I can give examples of kind of definition, but I can definitely say that we've, looked at scenarios and done it that way, and really to identify almost like what does good look like, what doesn't good look like in terms of quality. And the way I've tried to manage those kind of, make it as specific as possible, look at front end, back end. So you can, what I like about that way, rather than just having a definition, which I find a bit trickier, is that you have something which is much more future proof and that you can look at through lots of different lenses every time you work on something specific.
And sometimes actually finding a definition and agreeing on a definition of everything, but of quality in particular, can be so hard that you might not get there. So one way I like to look at it is to perhaps think about principles rather than a definition. So principles that describe how a team or organization should behave when it comes to quality. So because those tend to be more behavioral based, it's much easier for people to relate to them. And perhaps just a definition, even if it's good definition, might mean something different to different people. So by all means, if you can get to a definition, have it, but support it with some principles that describe how you're actually going to make that definition happen in your context.
I do have an example of a time where we agreed in the team that all tickets, all user story, not all tickets, but all like user stories, they would have acceptance criteria. And the definition of it's good enough in quality, not the best quality, but good enough, would mean that we would have like a end-to-end test that proves each of the acceptance criteria. It was a very simple definition, but it worked because even the demos were run based on that or that definition. It has other problems, such as the amount of time it takes for running everything, but it was a definition.
Cool.
I think Mario said something.
No, I was just about to say, okay. Does anyone else want to answer that last one? That was I believe the last question that we had. Oh, that's the last one. Okay. Well, we're at the end of our session. I just want to say a big, huge thanks to everybody on the panel. That's Marc Abraham from Asos, Marie Drake from News UK, Antonello Caboni from Treatwell, and Pedro Villela. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes, this time very, very good.
Brilliant. Practice makes perfect, right? From
Yeah.
Kerr. And thanks to Jay and Becca for being our host this evening. I'd just like to finish off actually just by talking about some of the points that we've covered this evening, some of the things that have come out of our conversation. So it seems that we're all about creating a culture that makes quality sustainable. Teams need a shared understanding of the value you want to deliver to the customer and work together to do this, making quality a shared responsibility. Finding allies and recognized leaders, people who share your vision and are keen to see things improve in certain areas, listening to people's needs and to get them on board and how it will make a difference with their own success. Companies that do that well at quality tend to perform better as a whole. Visualize data and speak in a language that the wider business can understand. That's really key and important, because if you're speaking differently to the rest of the teams that you work with, communication can easily break down, and that's obviously going to hinder, bringing quality to your organization. Consciously adding elements around quality into your interview process when you're hiring can help identify a quality mindset in candidates. Effective scenario-based interviewing is a useful method to see how the candidates react to having to think critically, as Marie touched on earlier. Ask questions, find gaps, and along with their willingness to work with QAs and the wider team. All of these things help to show how committed a potential hire is to tackling quality. So again, a big thank you to everybody. Does anyone else want to add anything before we end? Do you all want to say goodbye, or?
Yeah, I just want to say
thank you.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you, Nicola, for hosting such a brilliant panel, and thanks to Benchian for having us today.
Yeah, and thanks to all the audience who stayed on the line. I know it's the inauguration today, so if you've missed that, I apologize. But yeah, thanks everybody. Jay, do you want to close us out, or?
Thank you, Nicola. And a big thank you to our panelists for agreeing to participate in tonight's event. We hope you all got something from it, and at the very least, enjoy the conversation. If anyone wants to carry on the conversation outside, you can head over to our LinkedIn page. The link should be now on the chat. We will also be sharing a recording of tonight's event, and we'll follow up with a blog with all the key highlights we mentioned. So please keep an eye out for that. If there are any questions for the panelists that we didn't get a chance to answer tonight, we will be posting some of the answers on our follow-up blog, hopefully in a few days. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your evening, and we hope to see you all again soon at our next event.